The restaurant had gone completely silent when the elderly woman suddenly began to cry. Not because someone had insulted her. Not because she had fallen. She was crying because, for the first time in years, someone had looked directly into her eyes and answered her without making her feel like she was broken. Across the room, her billionaire son stood frozen, watching a shy waitress move her hands through the air in careful, imperfect signs. He had no idea that this small moment would uncover a secret his mother had carried for nearly a decade and change all three of their lives forever. If you believe that kindness can change a person's life, take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the smallest act of compassion becomes the beginning of someone's greatest second chance. The evening had started like any other at the elegant Belmont House, a restaurant overlooking the Chicago River in downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers reflected against tall windows, silverware gleamed beneath warm lights, and wealthy guests spoke quietly over expensive dinners. Among them sat a woman named Margaret Whitmore, 72 years old, dressed in a simple navy blue coat despite the restaurant's luxury. Her white hair was neatly pinned behind her ears, and a small hearing aid rested beside her untouched glass of water. Margaret was profoundly deaf. She had been deaf since an illness nearly 9 years earlier, but what hurt her most was not losing her hearing. It was watching people slowly stop talking to her. Her son, Nathan Whitmore, had built one of America's largest technology investment companies. At 38, he was worth billions, appeared regularly in business magazines, and was known for his sharp mind and colder-than-steel personality. Yet when it came to his mother, Nathan was different. He loved her deeply, but his success had created a distance between them that neither knew how to cross. That night, he had brought Margaret to Belmont House because it was her birthday. He had reserved the finest table in the restaurant. He had arranged flowers. He had ordered her favorite dessert. But Margaret barely touched anything. She sat quietly, watching people laugh around her while conversations passed over her head like birds she could never catch. Then a young waitress named Clara Bennett approached their table. Clara was 26, painfully shy, and working 2 jobs simply to stay ahead of rent and student debt. She had learned early in life that being quiet was safer than being noticed. Her father had died when she was 19, leaving her mother and younger brother struggling financially. Clara had postponed her plans for college and spent years working wherever she could find employment. She wasn't beautiful in the glamorous way the restaurant's wealthy customers expected. She had no designer clothes, no expensive jewelry. Her uniform was slightly too large around the shoulders. But she had an extraordinary habit of paying attention. She noticed when customers were uncomfortable. She remembered allergies. She refilled water before anyone asked. And when she saw Margaret sitting alone inside a crowded conversation, something inside her tightened. Clara approached the table and gently placed a small plate of bread near Margaret. Margaret looked up. Clara smiled. Then Margaret lifted her hands and signed something. Clara froze. She understood. Not perfectly, but enough. Her younger brother, Joshua, had been deaf since childhood. Clara had learned American Sign Language, so she could communicate with him when they were growing up. Her hands trembled slightly as she answered Margaret. Margaret's eyes widened. Nathan stopped eating. For the first time that evening, his mother smiled. Clara apologized with a small gesture, explaining that her signing was rusty because she hadn't used it much recently. Margaret laughed silently, her shoulders shaking with genuine joy. Nathan stared at the waitress as if she had performed a miracle. He had spent years hiring interpreters for his mother. He had paid thousands for private tutors and specialized devices. He had arranged luxurious vacations where staff members knew sign language. Yet none of those things had made Margaret smile like this. Clara stayed beside the table for only a few minutes. She asked Margaret about her birthday. Margaret answered in signs. Clara struggled to follow. Sometimes she misunderstood. Sometimes Margaret repeated herself. But neither of them cared. They were communicating. And for Margaret, that mattered more than perfection. Then something unexpected happened. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph. She showed it to Clara. It was a picture of a little boy standing beside a younger Margaret. The boy was perhaps 8 years old. Clara studied the photograph, then looked at Margaret. Margaret signed slowly. She had another son. Nathan looked startled. He immediately interrupted. He had never heard his mother talk about another son. Margaret's expression changed. Her hands began moving quickly. Clara's face went pale. She looked at Nathan, then back at Margaret. Something was wrong. Nathan demanded to know what his mother was saying. Clara hesitated. She didn't want to interfere, but Margaret touched her hand and signed again. This time Clara understood. The little boy in the photograph was named Samuel. He was Nathan's younger brother, and he had disappeared from their lives 17 years earlier. Nathan's face lost all its color. He knew the name. He remembered Samuel, but he had believed his brother was dead. Their father had told him Samuel had died after running away during a family crisis. Nathan had been 12 years old at the time. Margaret had never spoken about it afterward. Nathan had assumed grief had broken her. But Margaret was now signing something else. She had never believed Samuel was dead. She had searched for him for 17 years. And she had recently received a letter. A letter that she had hidden because she was afraid Nathan would stop her from looking. Clara stood there with tears forming in her eyes. Nathan could barely breathe. He had built an empire believing he had lost his brother forever. Now, through the hands of a shy waitress, he was learning that his mother had never stopped hoping. The restaurant seemed to disappear around them. Nathan sat beside Margaret and gently took her hands. For the first time in years, the billionaire son, who could negotiate multi-million-dollar deals without blinking, looked completely helpless. He asked his mother where the letter was. Margaret pointed toward her purse. Nathan opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was old-fashioned and uneven. It contained an address, a small town in Michigan. Nathan immediately wanted to leave, but Margaret stopped him. She signed something Clara translated through tears. She didn't want Nathan to search for Samuel because he felt guilty. She wanted him to search because he was his brother. That distinction broke him. Nathan had spent his entire adult life trying to buy solutions to problems money could not solve. But his mother wasn't asking for money. She was asking for love. 2 weeks later, Nathan and Margaret drove to Michigan. Clara came with them. Nathan had initially resisted, but Margaret insisted. She trusted the young woman who had given her something no amount of money could purchase. A voice. They found the address. It was a modest little house beside a mechanic's garage. A middle-aged man opened the door. He looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at him. Neither spoke. Then Margaret stepped forward. Her hands began to move. The man stared at her. His eyes filled with tears. He knew her. Samuel had not died. He had spent 17 years believing his family didn't want him. Their father had manipulated the situation after a bitter family dispute, telling Margaret that Samuel had chosen to leave and telling Samuel that Margaret had refused to find him. 2 lies had destroyed a family. 17 years had passed because everyone believed the wrong story. Samuel and Margaret embraced. Nathan stood nearby, crying openly. The billionaire who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts in rooms filled with powerful people could not control his tears as he watched his mother hold the little boy she had mourned for nearly 2 decades. Clara quietly stepped away. She thought her part was finished, but Nathan followed her outside. He thanked her. Clara shook her head. She said she hadn't done anything special. Nathan looked at her and told her she had done something money never could. She had noticed his mother, not as a deaf woman. Not as a billionaire's mother, just as a human being who wanted someone to listen. A few months later, Clara received an unexpected invitation. Nathan had created a foundation dedicated to improving accessibility for deaf and hard-of-hearing people. He offered Clara a position helping design community programs. She was terrified. She had never worked in an organization that large. She didn't believe she was qualified. Nathan told her that qualifications could be taught. Compassion couldn't. Clara accepted. But the biggest change happened inside Margaret. She began teaching Clara more sign language. Clara's brother Joshua became involved too. Soon, what had started as a chance encounter in a restaurant became a growing community. People who had spent years feeling invisible began finding places where they could communicate without shame. Nathan changed too. He became less obsessed with business. He started having dinner with his mother every Sunday. Sometimes they spoke through signs. Sometimes through writing. Sometimes they simply sat together. And every Sunday, Margaret placed a small photograph of Samuel on the table. Not because she was afraid of losing him again, but because she was grateful he had finally come home. Months later, Nathan returned to Belmont House. He sat at the same table where everything had begun. Clara was still working there part-time. Margaret arrived beside him. She looked at Clara and signed something that made Clara laugh. Nathan asked what she had said. Clara smiled through tears and translated. Margaret had said that she came to the restaurant for her birthday, but the greatest gift she received was not the expensive meal or the flowers. It was being heard. Nathan lowered his head. His eyes filled with tears. Then he reached across the table and took Clara's hand. He didn't offer her money. He didn't offer her a job. He simply thanked her for reminding him that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still matters, and subscribe for more stories about hope, compassion, and second chances. And before you go, comment, kindness is a language everyone understands if you believe one small act of kindness can change an entire life. Because sometimes, the person standing quietly in the corner isn't invisible. Sometimes they are the one person who can hear what everyone else has forgotten to listen to. And sometimes, a shy waitress with nothing but a kind heart can give a billionaire something billions of dollars could never buy, a family finding its way home.